Well, again, good morning. Welcome to Ridgewood Bible Church. My name is Daryl, and I get the privilege of serving here and being part of the team. And today we are returning to the book of Ruth. Before we begin, can I just say, and maybe how much fun it has been to go through this book? And just personally, even last week, I probably shouldn't admit this, I was oftentimes, usually all the time, if I'm doing it right, before people talk about, oh, you're stepping on my toes, and I say, well, I got to be honest, my toes are usually bloody by the time I get up here. But even last week's message, the previous week and the last week, not that anything really bad was going on, but let me just say, it just kept coming to mind, and I'm like, oh, thank you, Jesus. It has been such a joy to go through this book and to study it and to read it, because it is a fantastic book. It really is on every single level. Obviously, all of Scripture is equally important and beautiful and wonderful. It is God-breathed. It is from God Himself. But just for me, in this season, whatever reason, this book has just hit home, and I'm just very appreciative, and maybe it's too much information for you all. But anyways, so you remember last week, the title of the sermon was Loss. And so you'll remember that here is this family that has gone off into Moab because of famine, and they married people they shouldn't have married, and then what happens to the men in the family? They all die. Profound loss. Well, this week, the title is Largesse. And nobody uses that word ever. And that's why you should always title your sermons after words that nobody uses. Largesse, which simply means generosity or extreme generosity, which will come up. So last week was loss. This week is largesse. And how did it end? Look at chapter 1, verse 22. It says, so chapter 1 ended. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem when? As the barley harvest was beginning. Okay? So we have this little bit of a transition. Here's this movement. They're going back home, at least for Naomi. And they're going back home just as the barley harvest is happening. Okay? So here's this interesting timestamp. And obviously the reason they're going back is because rumor had it that God had come to the aid of Israel and the had lifted the famine. And the famine meant that the crops were growing. This is obviously an agrarian society. And so they're going back. They're going back for food because where else can they go? What else are they going to do? Okay. So chapter 2, verse 1 gives us a little bit of a setup, if you will. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, her deceased husband, right? Whose name was Boaz. And let me just say, if it wasn't such a, Boaz, it doesn't kind of roll off the tongue, but let me just say, if you're going to name your kid something, Boaz would be a pretty good name. Just saying. So who is this? So it says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. So this is kind of the precursor. What's going to happen is the rest of this chapter we're going to find out more of who this guy is. And so the author says, I'm going to kind of prime the pump a little bit and let you know. I want to introduce this guy named Boaz. And so now as you read, you're like, who is he? Who is this guy? But what do we know about him so far? We know that he is in the family of Elimelech, her husband's, right? We're going to dive into that more next week. But and that's going to be important. It's going to be actually quite critical to the story. But what else do we learn about Boaz beyond his name? What does it say? He is a man of standing. Does anybody else have a different version of this?
Great wealth.
Great wealth. Right? Well, there's several different ways you can translate this, but is a man of great strength and valor. The picture here is probably more of a moral strength. He was a man of standing, as we learn in subsequent chapters, and meaning good standing within the community. He had some form of wealth. He was a landowner, as we're going to learn. But his man of strength, and I would say is what is really pointing to, is his character. And what I want us to do is this: we read through this chapter, and even the next coming weeks, the rest of the book. Does Boaz live up to his name? Did Elimelech? No. But does Boaz live up to his name? It's fun to find out. Okay, so here it is. That's Boaz. How are we doing? His name, by the way, means strength, obviously. Valor and character and so forth. Verse 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." And Naomi said, "Go ahead." Okay. What's going to happen is Ruth is saying, "Let me go glean behind the harvesters." Because we know the harvest is beginning, the barley harvest specifically, right? And so the practice was, in Deuteronomy and Leviticus, both gave this, God gave instructions to Israel. Excuse me, I'm trying not to cough. Excuse me. Gave them instructions. So when they harvested the land, you guys know this, when they harvested the land, what were they not to do?
Leave the corners.
They were going to leave the corners and the outer edges, right? So the harvesters would go through and they would purposely not harvest every single stalk. They would leave the edges. Okay? And in fact, moreover, excuse me, ooh, this is going to be fun. Moreover, when it would, if let's say they were harvesting, they'd grab a bunch, the practice was they'd grab a bunch of stalks of grain, right? And then they would cut it. Okay? Now, if some of it happened to fall out of their hands, not only were they not to harvest all the way to the edges, they were, if somebody dropped some, they were to leave that as well. And why was that? Why were they to do that? They were to do it to leave something for the gleaners. And when you read Deuteronomy and you read Leviticus, it is specifically for the widow, for the orphan, the fatherless, and the foreigner. So the foreigners, for the widow, thank you. They would have something to come along, to come up and not starve. Gleaning. Okay. But what does Ruth do? This is Ruth's initiative. What does she say? She says, "Let me go. Let me go glean." Just maybe there's someone who's going to let me glean on their field. I don't know. I don't probably even know what this, gleaning means fully, but we got to do something. So she takes some initiative. She says, "Naomi, let me go." Naomi says, "Go." Okay? Now, points to her work ethic, by the way. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, by the way, is a specific chapter that speaks of this. Now, before I go farther, I heard a good friend of mine, John Gerhardt. He spoke on this topic of somewhat, and he referenced an article that talks about the implications for business and economics of the practice and principles of gleaning. Thank you. Fantastic little article. It's in I got 2 copies back there if you want to pick one up. Because it's interesting. Real quick, I'll pretend I have time. What is the practice? First off, why does God, this is critical, why does God institute gleaning? When you read Deuteronomy chapter 24, he gives the instruction, he says, "Thus saith the Lord." This isn't, this is God saying, do this. Why? What does God know about us that he says, "I need to tell you to leave some for the foreigner, for the widowed and the orphan"? What does he know about us? Right? Hey, I grew this. I did all the work. You better believe I'm scooping up every last grain. That's money, that's profit, that's food. He knows how possessive we become of our stuff. Our natural inclination is not to share. And especially not to share with a foreigner, with the right? You see what I'm saying? And so God put it in law. Anyways, by the way, so what's interesting is, does practice of gleaning assumes profit and profitability. And then it simultaneously gives provision for those in need. Okay, I should get back to my notes at some point in time. But I do encourage you to grab that paper if you find it interesting. I found it really fascinating. So God knows what we're talking about. So Ruth, that's her initiative. Look at verse 3. Ruth is chance. This is fantastic. Please don't miss this. So she goes, maybe I'll find some farmer, some landowner's going to let me glean. I don't know, maybe there's somebody over there that'll show me some kindness and just let me follow. So Naomi says, go ahead, my daughter. Verse 3. So she, Ruth, went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. Okay? Lo and behold, there's some harvesters. She walks in, and she undoubtedly asked for permission, and they grant it, which is a whole other, which is incredible. And then read this. Listen. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. What are the chances? So this phrase, as it turned out, in the original, this is the phrase. This is fun. Her chance chanced upon Boaz's field. So it's like this, it's like, what are the chances? This is incredible. Believe it or not, this is astounding. She just so happened to fall onto this field that happens to be owned by Boaz, the guy of standing, whose name means wink, wink. Happened to just so. What are the chances? Her chance chanced upon. Entered a field, began to glean. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech, just in case we forgot. Verse 4. Just then, well, imagine that. What are the chances of that? Just so happened that this field she was gleaning on was owned by Boaz, and guess what? It just so happened, chance, this woman is so lucky, that Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. Now, we in this room understand what the author is trying to communicate. This is like, very facetious, like, this is clearly not chance, is it? Boaz arrives, and what is his greeting, by the way, to his workers? The Lord be with you. Now it seems to be that this was a common expression between maybe a boss and his employees or his family, a common greeting. But what do we learn about Boaz from this greeting? Who does he recognize is his Lord? And what is the blessing? I want the Lord to be with you. We learned something about Boaz already in his relationship to God. Right? And how do his workers respond? The Lord bless you. Excuse me. The Lord bless you. So not only there seemed to be this term of respect and relationship of respect between the employee and the employer. I don't think it's too far of a stretch to see that they respected him and he respected them. I see a genuineness to this greeting. Not just the, hey, how are you? It's no, may the Lord be with you and may the Lord bless you. We learned something. And so Boaz asks the question, he says, asks his overseer, the manager, he says, who does that young woman belong to? Who's that? So Boaz questioned. Just so happens, Boaz shows up. Imagine that. May the Lord be with you. Who's that gleaning? Now, what we learn is, read this with me. Hold on, sorry. Overseer replied, this is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. And she had asked, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvester. She came to the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz asked, who's that working? And the guy responds. So he knows, he asked her, and whether it's her reputation or she shared it directly, that this is Moabite who came back with Naomi. And she's here working to gather some food to take back to her Naomi. She's working to show chesed, loyal love towards Naomi. Who, even though she's a foreigner, she's working. Forgive me. Should have taken more coughs and breath. Forgive me. And so she says, may the Lord bless you. Be blessed. Who is this? It's Naomi. It's Ruth, the Moabite, the foreigner. Interesting. Does Ruth meet the criteria required to glean? Is she a widow? Is she a foreigner? And you can make a strong case that she's fatherless. Because it says, may you go back to your mother's house, by the way. So she's like the trifecta. She's the poster child for gleaning. And so she gleans. And interesting, by the way, the workers, even without the permission of Boaz, what do? They let her glean. Well, that tells me a lot about Boaz, because he has created a culture within his company, if you will, within his family, within his workers, that they would want to follow the law of God. Have they harassed her up to this point? No. They know her story, and they allow it. Does Boaz criticize the manager for letting her glean? No. What are you talking about? She's taking our money, man. That's coming out of your take. Whatever she takes, man, I'm getting that money. And so, again, tells us a lot about the business practice, and I believe the faith of this man called Boaz. Okay. Now look at this. Continue on verse 8. Boaz's protection of Ruth. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me, don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women and work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. What is Boaz's response to this? It's not just, okay, let her continue. He goes up to her and says, let me tell you, please, Ruth, do not go to anywhere else. Stay here. Stay and glean from my field. Stay with me, and what is he doing? He's not only providing for her, he's offering protection for her, isn't he? Right? We'll learn later on. To go, do you think all the landowners were righteous and upstanding men who would be willingly to let people glean? Absolutely not. You know that there were landowners and men that would take advantage of Ruth and take advantage of her vulnerability and chastise her and kick her off the field. Get away from here, even though the law would say, because at heart we're greedy. And so Boaz says, no, you stay here. Not only that, just his protection. Now we begin to get even more of his generosity, of his largesse. Because what does he do? He says, listen, if you're thirsty, come get a drink from the waters that the men have brought and drawn up. Come alongside the women that are working with me. Come here, stay with them, work with them, glean. but be here. The servants will not harm you because you are dangerous and it's dangerous and you are vulnerable. And we'll look at verse 10. What is Ruth's response? She is absolutely amazed. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you are noticing me, a foreigner? She recognizes her position. She recognizes that this is above and beyond. This is not like her response is, well, that's right. About time someone shows up. This is the way it should be. No. She falls down in gratitude. She falls down in humility because she's seeing this is not normal. This is above and beyond. This is generosity. And I'm a foreigner. I'm not one of you. Wow. This is above and beyond. Look at verse 12. Look at verse 12. Boaz replied, verse 11. I have been told about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. We get a picture of Ruth's character. Her loyal, sacrificial, generous, kind love that she has shown to her mother-in-law. Where she is out here working to provide for her and her mother-in-law, even though she is a foreigner. I have heard what you have done, and may the Lord bless you, he says. May the Lord bless. Look at verse 12. This is, may the Lord repay you or bless you for the work you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have sought protection under. So you guys know this picture. A hen will gather its chicks under her wing, right? And that hen will hold them and protect them even to her death. There's a story I heard a professor talk about a barn burnt down to the ground, and the owner was walking along afterwards. He's just kicking stuff around, kind of dejected, and he kicks this lump of something on the ground, and it was a hen that had burned in the fire. And as he kicked it over, all these chicks come running out. See, he says, listen, Ruth, you know what? You know what I see, what I'm recognizing is that I'm asking that the God who you have sought protection and refuge under his wings, may he bless you. And again, Ruth responds with humility. Verse 13, may I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. Ruth says, listen, take your lowest servant, and what she's saying is, even though I am lower than your lowest servant, and yet you have shown me kindness. You have shown me chesed. You have shown me loyal love and care and sacrificial. You have shown me. And obviously, you brought me at ease and spoken kindly, though I'm not one of yours. So there's a response of gratitude, humility, and sincerity. But Boaz's largesse continues even more, doesn't it? Look at verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. And as she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up and don't rebuke her. So, the mealtime comes along and he says, this would be way outside of normal practice. He turns to Ruth and says, come eat at my table. Come eat at my table, the table. Take some bread, dip it in the good stuff. Eat all you want. And here's some more. If you are Ruth and you've been traveling, there's been a famine, what would this mean? Can you picture what she's feeling? I suspect that that piece of bread was the best tasting bread she's ever had. Because she is recognizing what a blessing this piece of bread is. She eats till she's full, and there's leftovers. Generosity on top of generosity on top of generosity. And then it continues. He says, listen, when you go back out to harvest again, this is what I want you to do. I believe the picture here is really kind of without her knowing it. So she maintains her dignity. This whole gleaning thing, by the way, does a great job of maintaining someone's dignity. Anyways, it was, hey, kind of maybe drop some. Leave some extra. Make it easy for her. I want you to take some of the choicest and easiest, the grain that you're harvesting, and I want you to I mean, listen, this isn't just gleaning, this is just straight giving. And obviously we go back, the repetition of protection. Do not rebuke her. Verse 17 through 23, Ruth's work and report. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. I really wanted, forgive me for not getting, I was going to get a big bag of grain. I was going to get a big bag of flour, but I knew that would end poorly because there would be flour all over the place. Because an ephah is about 30 pounds. Do you know how much food 30 pounds of barley will make for someone in a family? In a single day, remember, the morning she's going out thinking, man, maybe, just maybe, maybe there's someone that'll let me glean a little bit and we can bring a little bit home. She goes, she works all day. There's some application in there for it somewhere, by the way. She works, and she works hard. And because of the generosity of Boaz, she comes home with 30 pounds of barley. Not just that. She carried it back to town, verse 18, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. What in the, you know, and it was like, what? You know, she's carrying like... Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. What a picture. Did Ruth hide the leftovers? She's like, oh man, this is so good, I ain't sharing this. No, she gets home, she plops 30 pounds of barley in the room, and then she says, here, look, have some of this stuff back there, you gotta eat this. She's being generous. She's showing chesed to Naomi again. And her mother-in-law asked, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Yeah? And then Ruth gives a report. Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Then she added, the man is a close relative. He is one of the guardian redeemers. And we'll talk about guardian kinsman redeemer next week. Okay. Naomi knows exactly. She's like, whoa, Boaz? Are you kidding me? Boaz? Oh, this is good news, folks. But did you notice what she says? The Lord bless him. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, he has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Now this verse is a very challenging verse. Because even before I was studying it, I'm looking through it and I was reading this, I'm like, who's the he has not stopped showing? I want to know who's that referencing? Is it referencing Boaz or is it referencing God? And it's really hard to figure out which. Personally, I think it's referencing God. God has not stopped showing kindness to the living and the dead. I say that because of the transition. The man is our close relative, she says. It doesn't say he is. And if that's the case, I want you to notice something very important. Last time we heard from Naomi, other than giving permission to go glean, what is she telling people? Call me Mara, because I'm bitter, because God's hand is against me. And if, which I think it is, this is referencing back to God has not stopped showing. Do you see the change? There's a bit of hope here. Wait. Boaz? That's whose field? And Boaz lets you bring home 30 pounds of, like this isn't, what? Where'd you get the leftovers? Wait, at his table? And she's recognizing this is a gift from God, and just maybe God's hand is not against her. Just maybe he hasn't stopped showing kindness. Wow. To me and my family, even the family that is experiencing loss, the living and the dead. So, there's hope. And then she says, what does she say? The man is our close relative. Verse 21. Then Ruth the Moabite said, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. Did you get that? Come back. And not just come back tomorrow, come back until we're done. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because if you go in someone else's field, you might be harmed. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So, forgive me. I'm going to talk even louder because I'm righteous back. Here it is. She says, stay with him. You've been invited to glean for the whole harvest? Yeah, go. Don't go anywhere else. Because one, it is dangerous, but you need to stay with him. And the generosity, this is incredible. Stay with him. And so what does she do? She does just that. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and what? The wheat harvest. Now, can you get this? One day she comes home with 30 pounds. Who knows how much more barley she's bringing home. Then the wheat harvest comes, and you know the picture of generosity would just continue. This is blessing on top of blessing. This is saving this couple, this family. Right? Saving them from starvation and destitution. Saving them from harm. because of the generosity of Boaz. This is maintaining the dignity of this family and of these women. And no, by the way, does Ruth get a little bank and then take off? Ruth stays and continues to live with Naomi just as she promised she would. Remember? Chapter 1. She honors her commitment and her word because she is a woman of character as well. So here's some observations and hopefully some applications real quick. First off, Boaz sure seems to be living up to his name. Right? The principle of gleaning. I truly am. I'm really fascinated on the economic implications of the principles of gleaning and what that can mean. The article references a company. They take this to heart. And so what they did is they make airplanes, and they would make and sell 9 airplanes for a profit. They would manage their company well enough where they were able to make these 9 planes with a large enough profit. So the 10th plane they could either give or give at a greatly reduced price to nonprofits or ministries or so forth that would need a plane. Do you see that? See the idea? Well, here's the principle of gleaning. Obviously, we're not an agrarian society anymore, but there may be some principles that come. So it allows for profit. It allows for it requires good management of your people. And it also brings dignity to those of you. So there's some application there for sure. Now, if you are Ruth and Naomi, and you're heading back, could it get any darker? And just when it couldn't get any darker, what happens? They just so happen to walk onto a field that just so happens to be owned by Boaz, who just so happens to walk onto the field that day you're working. See, God shows up, doesn't he? We'll discuss this more. How does God show up? Does he show up with some super miracle? No, this is God showing up in the everyday stuff. I'm going to repeat this in the upcoming weeks to pretend I haven't said it. But God gives dignity and purpose, divine dignity and divine purpose to everyday occurrences, doesn't he? And this is a reminder. Showing a little bit or a lot of it of generosity by giving someone some food or giving someone some help, giving someone a little extra. Difference of life and death. You see? Just when things couldn't get worse, God shows up. Because we know there is no chance, and there's no chancing upon chance. It's the hand of God working. The other side of that coin is, do we take advantage of what God is providing? Do we take advantage of what God is providing? Or are we too good? Lastly, we all want to be Boaz, don't we? Obviously. We read this and we're like, I want to be that guy. And that's a good thing to want to be. There's application there. Who is God bringing around you this week that you can show a little bit of chesed, a little bit of loyal love, a little bit of generosity, a little bit of largesse towards? By the way, let me be real careful on this. It never chastises Naomi for not going to work. She couldn't, for whatever reason, right? So that was fine. Ruth could, and so she did. And that was honorable as well. But who is God bringing into your life that you can be a Boaz to? Knowing that even the smallest gesture will have divine and can have divine purpose. I say that not as a, hey, you guys really need to start doing this, because I know this church and I know you well enough. That your heart, by your prayers and your actions and your generosity upon generosity, show that you guys, all of y'all, are and desire to be Boazes to the people around you. And so I say this as a pastor saying, keep it up. We all want to be Boaz. Wisely, wise, generous, giving, helping, praying, and so forth. And then real quick, this is the most important part. Boaz typifies Christ, doesn't he? Do any of us really deserve God's gracious gifts that he gives us? Oh, we're the lowest of the low, aren't we? Our sin puts us opposed to God, and yet, when we come to him, does he turn us away? When we come to him, basically, as beggars saying, does God say, get away. Get away, you lazy bum. Get away, you whatever. No. Out of his love, he comes towards us and he wraps his arms around us and he dies for us so that we can have all of his blessings. Do we deserve his gracious provision, his protection, his lavish grace, his love, his presence, his promises? Of course not. Do we, as the lowest of lows in our sin, deserve to sit at his table? Of course not. To experience the satisfaction found in him alone, to the extent of, to an overflowing of joy and peace that is found with him? No. And yet, he does anyway. And it is in him that we find our ease because of the work Christ has done for us. Our peace, because God has done all the work. Not only did he grab some and leave it aside for us to pick up real easy. You see what I'm saying? God does all the work. He graciously does all the work to restore the relationship we have with him on the cross, through the cross. That all we have to do is not work at all, but simply receive it by faith. Do we deserve it? Absolutely not. But that's how generous God is towards us, as Boaz illustrates. And because of that, now you and I can be people of largesse to those around us and to each other. That's good news. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful chapter. This chapter that reminds us of just who you are and how generous and gracious you are towards us. Thank you for allowing us to participate in what you're doing in the lives of those around us, to be part of their salvation, of their help, and to be part of pointing them to you as we celebrate who you are and what you've done. It's with that we say we love you in Jesus' name.